happens to be a actual case where a very expensive, beautiful lightning ridge crystal opal has been chipped in the corner. And what would normally require a very talented and very specific set of lapidary skills and shop you may have to hunt down, we're going to show you how an accomplished goldsmith can make that repair at the bench. Look at the project. This is a stunning crystal opal. And as you can see, there is a nice size piece that has been chipped from the backside of the stone, creating from above a conchoidal and very visible area besides weakening the edge as it is. Now, what I like to do so that I can always hone and help my own self with information is I take the measurements of it beforehand and the weight beforehand so that I can see how much weight I lose by way of percent and what kind of dimensions, so I can always try to improve upon that, because I kind of have a reputation for losing the least amount of weight on my recuts, and it actually, recutting has become one of my most often done lapidary projects. So many of you have opals that just over time they've worn or scratched, and emeralds always having issues. Well, some of those can be done at the bench. Now, let me show you something that is identical to whether you do lapidary work at the bench or with the heavy and larger equipment, and that is how a stone is polished using a particular compounds. To get to the polishing point, we use a series of beginning abrasives. Now, those involve, if you need to, let's say cut off a larger corner, well, you have two choices. You have the silicon carbide. There's two different thicknesses there. The very thin ones are very expensive and to break and very easy to break. A diamond little miniature saw, great choice, and of course can cut through any material, including ruby and sapphire. There's also diamond drum sanders to be able to round it quicker than you would use the silicon carbide wheel, which is a standard fare and still wonderful to use for softer material. This is what I think we're going to be working with today. It is a, concave wheel, which will allow us to give us a rounded corner, and I'll show you how that will come in handy. Now remember, if you ever wonder between concave and convex, think of it this way, and my mom taught me this as well. She also told me the stalactite, stalagmite, and how to know the difference. Concave, think of a cave being an entrance, something that you have to go into. So that's the way she described a wheel. It would be a cave, a dip in it, something that you would enter. And that's how I remember that versus convex. Okay, then from there you go to sanding wheel or the snap-on sanding discs and finer sanding drums that come in various and assorted shapes and finenesses. Then the delivery mechanism for polishing is the largest difference between working at the bench and working on the bigger equipment. And instead of using a large wheel or a flat plate wheel, well, you can get little cotton or muslin buff wheels, and with that I charge them of the various mesh in diamonds. They come in different shapes. You can dip them in water to if you're using a cerium oxide or aluminum oxide polish, and keep it moist enough to not worry about friction. And you can also then use any oil for the diamond compounds to reduce the friction as well. This is the concave wheel I talked about that we're going to use, and what we're going to do, you can see that quite substantial chip out of the corner, but it did not actually take the corner out as they so often do. What we need to try to still achieve is keep the rounded form of the corner like the others. Now, with this particular wheel, we're going to make it easy to keep that rounded form. We're only going to do it a little bit to we get to the point to where we switch to another tool. So let's get started. All right, as you can see, I have put some water on the wheel, water on the opal. It's not going to develop a lot of heat or friction because at the speeds I'm going to be using, it just doesn't occur. Now, diamond being so much harder than the opal, this portion won't take long. And you can see, I think I will just catch the top here. And now we're going to change wheels. Here we have, you see the water on the diamond wheel. This gives us a lot of control because we can go as slow as we want, but using diamond, it achieves what we want to do very quickly. So it makes up for it, so to speak. Now, we are going for minimal weight loss. And all we really want to do in this project is be able to remove, and as you can see, we want to remove the conchoidal fracture. Conchoidal is the type of fracture that glass-like objects create, including obsidians and other silicates. And it is where you can see those curved lines. Now, you can see we have removed a good portion of them, a little bit more to go at this stage, and we're going to change wheels. All right, I feel comfortable at this stage, and now I want to go to a finer wheel with a slower cut. The next step I have chosen to go to is to use a sanding disc. They make these as snap-on or just screw-on in different grits and different materials. They have them from aluminum oxide to actually one labeled garnet, and garnet has been used as an abrasive for a long time as well. So they are extremely effective for what we're going to do now. Here's the opal. We have the coarse ground area. Now we're going to smooth it up, fine-tune it, and remove the remaining area of where the conchoidal fracture is, which happens to be the white area. Underneath it now you can see that little reflective area that's left. This just puts us still a little bit more in charge because we're going to move at a slower pace. Using this disc, we don't use any water. It doesn't generate enough heat, and the water would degrade the sanding disc. Again, the goal being to remove the accidental created imperfection, because optically it would be visible from above as a break. And look at that. Okay, so you see in real time how long that took. Right tool, right job, right knowledge. By using the sanding disc and finishing up with that, we are pretty much done with any major removal of material. Now we're going to complete the finishing of the sanding by stepping up the grit to a much finer grit. This grit mesh will allow us to remove any of the flattened areas that sanding discs or other coarser material creates, and give us a smooth exterior. It's almost the pre-polish. It's the pre to the pre-polish. Let me show you how it's done. I've chosen a wheel that isn't real hard. In other words, it's not made out of aluminum oxide. It's a softer type of wheel, but still hard enough to remove the hardness of 5 to 5.5 on the Mohs scale of material, which includes all your glasses and your opals, apatites, fluorites, and all those family of gems, even up to the feldspars, and slower, but still will do the quartz. All right, let me show you how it's done. It's a very quick process. You can see on the back a little bit of the before, and you're going to get to see the after. This will also bring out any of the imperfections you may have created with the sanding discs or uneven areas. It removes material, but does it very slowly. You see we have just that little tiny spot left. I hope you can see that. From the original conchoidal fracture. And this still cuts fast enough that we should be able to remove it using this choice of grit. So we have pretty much accomplished what we want to do with this wheel. Now let me change over to a pre-polished one. This is a particular wheel that will leave a really fine finish on metal, like a prong, without scratching the stone if it comes in contact with it. But I've found that if you have a pre-polished softer stone, it will not scratch the stone, but actually give it a shine, a pre-polish. Not the one we're going to wind up with in a moment, but enough of one that allows us to go to the next step using diamond compound, because that is where we're headed to right now. I have my cotton Muslim buff wheel. These come in different hardnesses. You can find them. And I have my compound. This one I've designated for the 600 mesh. And so what I do is, because it is kind of a oil-based, it doesn't need much lubrication as far as having to apply water or oil for a coolant. You just have to go relatively slow. And in this case, since we're holding the stone, we can actually feel any heat generated. Now, in other instances, you have to what we call dop the stone, or attach the stone to a metal stick, or it can be the head of a nail, depending on the size of the stone. Other things, you don't have to buy the expensive things meant for it. And that allows you to be able to work with things you can't hold. Fortunately for me, it made it so much easier to hand hold the larger opal we're working with. But mind you, that it can be spun out of your hand and you can create further damage to the opal if you do not feel like you can hold that stone securely enough. So if you don't feel like you can hold it securely enough, then do attach it to a dop stick. I like to use a fast setting 2-part epoxy. It's is very convenient and efficient. It gives you a lot of control. So consider doing that if you're not used to holding them. So we have our 600 mesh compound on our cotton buff wheel. This is going to pretty much very closely accomplish everything we want except a final polish. And you have to raise it up off the stone every few moments. That's what gives you the cooling factor you need. If you kept it directly on there, it would overheat. Wow, this is already really accomplishing what I want. And remember, the whole goal was to optically assure that the inclusion or flaw at that point was not visible from above, because I happen to know that the setting will hide the edge. Let me wipe this off, and you're going to be able to see just how smooth and beautiful. Remember the chip? Now, let me move this around and make sure you get the light catching off of that surface. The little bit of waviness doesn't matter. That isn't going to be visible, but that entire conchoidal fracture, I hate to use that word, but chip is gone, and we're not done polishing. Let's take it to the next level. I've changed out my cotton wheel to a one that I use for 14,000 mesh. Now, this is unusual. Normally you can't go from a 600 mesh to a 14,000 and still achieve a bright finish. You would never be able to do that unless you're working with a softer stone. Because I noticed what a high polish I got from the 600, let's see, I'm skipping right to the 14. Remember, none of the work that you're actually seeing is on the top of the stone. It is all on the back side. So when you're talking about time versus money versus risk, you can achieve the polish you want. Never be noticed any difference in the course I'm taking. If I was working on the top of the stone, I would take it through a couple more grits in between or mesh so that we would get that glass finish on the top part, but not required, so it would be unnecessary work. Let's go ahead and put that 14,000 finish on. I mean, look at that finish already. That's 600. That's why when I talk about on some of my stones that I've cut, that I have a 50,000 mesh finish in polishing. Now maybe it'll mean, and you'll understand what that means, of just how high of a polish that is. And the 100,000, usually isn't even discernible when you go that high, unless you're looking at it under high magnification. Let me give it a little bit more. Since we did go ahead and skip a few of the grits, It does take a little bit longer sometimes to achieve the finish we're looking for. But again, since we're on the back of the stone, not quite so important. To follow all the right course of action that most cutters would go through. All right, let me wipe this off and then we'll get a better look. We have completed the project. The polish is beautiful. Certainly for the back of the stone, well beyond what would be actually required in the project that we're doing. We have remeasured the stone and reweighed the stone, and we've only lost 10 points. 10 points. So also you can see the dimensions. We only lost in one direction, the length, and a minimal amount at that. So if it actually had to go back into an original setting, it would still fit that setting. And as you can see, again, even from any distance, that the repair, and that is what it's called, is totally unnoticeable from the front at any angle. We have accomplished our goal, and we did it all without using heavy and expensive and space-consuming lapidary equipment. With just a little bit of knowledge, a lot of experience and practice, and a goldsmith can do a lot of lapidary projects at the bench. Many just don't know it, but I happen to be one that does. So thank you for joining me in this very fun and exciting episode. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.